Greetings again, brothers and sisters within the Kingdom of England, Empire of Albion, as well as the Kingdom of Ireland, also America. It is I, your noble, humble brother, Dion de Belmont from the illustrious noble house of Belmont. And today we're going to return with part 2 of the Irish Origins of Civilization, volume 1 by Michael Tsarion. Before we get started, I'd like to give honors to our divine creator, the divine father, as well as our divine earthly mother. To give honors to our king, our queen, to our brothers and sisters within the realm, to the trustees, the officers, all of those of you who are doing good deeds and random acts of kindness all the time, wherever you are. Today is Saturday, April 18th, 2976 of the Berber calendar, which is equivalent to your 2026 Gregorian calendar. And like always, it is a beautiful time to be alive. So I don't want to go ahead and be too long in the introduction. I've been trying to get this video done for days now. And now I finally had the chance to go ahead and continue until until the next chapter of the book. So momentarily, I'm going to go ahead and be bringing that up. Also, again, if this is the first time you visiting the channel, please don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel. If this information is something that you've never heard before, you're definitely in for a treat. I try to be, as clear as possible, and the more comfortable, I get in doing this, the better it's going to be. So please bear with me. Okay, so as we have on the screen, in chapter 2 says, so what about the Irish? So before we go ahead and go into chapter 2, we're going to go ahead and try to summarize what we know so far. So far at this moment, from what we read from chapter 1, as well as the introduction, we had the opportunity to hear a little bit regarding the Irish and regarding where they got started, who they came from, the plight, the issues that's taking place right now with us, and what we need to do at this day and time for us to be able to solve these issues, so therefore our children don't inherit what we're going through at this day and time. And the only way for us to be able to fix our modern issues, we have to travel back in the past. And in this case, we have to go back into a time where those who are known as the predecessors of who we are, where they originate. In this case, we're going back to Ireland, based off of what the book is speaking about, as well what we have read so far from the Phoenician origins of the Irish, Scots, Anglo-Saxons. So let's go ahead and get into this. So it says, the Greeks called Ireland the Sacred Isle in Ogygia, nor can anyone, says Camden, conceive why they should call it Ogygia, unless perhaps for its antiquity, for the Greeks called nothing Ogygia unless what was extremely ancient. Ignatius Donnelly. So as we can see, the word itself, Ogygia, just represents something that's ancient and out of time, that man knows not. And in this case, Ireland goes back to a time that we know nothing about. And hopefully we're going to go ahead and get a little bit more clarity about Ireland as we move along inside the book. Put the most erudite wordsmiths onto the job, and at the end of their industry, the nature of the Irish will remain mysterious. The question of Irishness is a subject that will not be broached here by this author. The Irish are what they are, complex and contradictory, living upon a land soaked in the blood of its children. Ireland's green meadows entomb the world's greatest kings and poets. They lie in a temple without walls, and a natural cathedral has been in times past the home of men and women who knew the nature of all things. The finest musicians, healers, philosophers, poets, and rebels have walked its hills and the valleys, and stood upon its wild remote cliffs. It is a country that has been given birth to inspire champions of political and social freedom, and to the oldest civilization on earth. So as We just read so far that speaking in regards to Ireland giving ways to the oldest civilization on Earth. And we're going to learn a little bit more regarding the theory, um, the Eastern Western theory, because that's all it is in regards to the civilizations getting their start. And we're going to start to understand that actually it was a Western to Eastern migration. The earliest farming sites in Northern Europe are to be found in Ireland, occurring at approximately the same time as the cultivation of crops in the Mesopotamian River Valley in the Near East. And that's coming from Arthur Kemp, March of the Titans. The National Triads of Wales, which are, according to Matthew Arnold and Professor Muller, the oldest literature and the oldest living language in Europe. This oldest Celtic literature is the historic triads of the island of Britain, of which 160 are still in existence. They consist of the poems of the ancient bards and convey to us the religion, philosophy, and law of the early Britons. Like the Vedas of India, they were handed down by oral tradition, and not until the 6th century AD were they written down by the bards of King Arthur's court, Taliesin and Leonwook Hen. So they're telling us that the history of Ireland didn't really start getting written down until at least the 6th century. Prior to that, the history, traditions, the culture, even including the laws, were all passed down orally. And we know a lot of civilizations that have come and gone from the ancient people to a modern people. They didn't actually have their history written down. So only the new, I would say, since new commerce coming in, where you start seeing them actually trying to write down history so therefore they can remember. Historians and archaeologists have biased us to think of prehistoric or pre-modern cultures as societies of scarcity. This was certainly not the case in ancient Britain, as they had the time as well as determination to plan and build their enormous outdoor temples, constructing from 5 to 10,000 stone circles over a 1,000-year period. Daniel Pinchbeck, 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl. These days, we are a long way from the time when an Irishman's status and the merit among his people came from his ability to compose poetry or play laments. A long way. The Irish are a raped people, a hurt people, and they have grown hard because of the inconceivable suffering they have endured throughout the cruel ages. Most Irishmen are backward looking, and we see this idiosyncrasy as rather appropriate given the gravity of what has occurred on their land through time. Not that most Irishmen are aware of the facts concerning their turbulent history. Unfortunately, the desecration of Ireland extends to human memory as well as to history. But again, our investigation focused not on the modern Irish, but on their ancestors. We are concerned with what the Irish were. Pause. Exactly. Because the modern Irishmen, they don't actually pay or even really think about too much about the ancient past in regards to their predecessors. And my opinion would be because those folks who are there now aren't truly the original descendants of those who you would call Irish, or who have known to be called many other forms that will translate to the Irish people. And hopefully as we read and go about in our research, which we already kind of talked a little bit from the last video when we did the Encyclopedia Britannica term Berber, we kind of got an idea of that. But now we're just kind of going a little bit more in details based off of the origin. And then we're going to talk a little bit too about what Coleman's Beaumont, who we see that Michael Tsarion gives reverence to in his research and putting inside the book, The Irish Origins of Civilization. So it says there has been maintained a smokescreen around Ireland since the English invasion and the consequent looting of the island with the destruction of her sacred shrines, which was meant to obscure her great past and her contribution in letters, science, culture, true religion, and civilization. It goes without saying that we owe more to ancient Ireland, Erie, for these blessings than to any other people or nation. And that's quoted from Conor McDarry. Far from these ancestral Britons, having been mere painted savages, roaming wild in the woods as we are imaginatively told in most of the modern histories. They are now, on the contrary, disclosed by newly found historical facts given by Professor Waddell, known to have been from the very first grounding of their galley kills upon these shores over a millennium and a half before the Christian era, a highly civilized and literate race, pioneers of civilization. And that is coming from Isabel Hill Elder, Kilt, Druid, and Cody, 1962. So far from what we have heard from these quotes from these authors, what we have been told about the Irish have pretty much have either merely been erroneously told to us, or there have to be some type of hidden hand at play, why we aren't really given the true narrative regarding who they are and what happened to them based off of what we're going to start reading and what we don't know today about them. There is no evidence whatsoever to support the myth that the pre-Roman British were savages or barbarians who could equal the Romans themselves for savage lust and bloodthirstiness, as witnessed in the butcheries of the Roman Colosseum, where thousands of people, Christians and prisoners of war, were thrown to wild beasts to the feast of eyes of Roman youths and maidens. Those were cultured Romans of the classical age, of which our educators rave. No evidence like that can ever be brought against the ancient British. England, the mother of liberty, never saw any barbarities until the Roman persecutions under Diocletian about 300 AD. A mob of unstrained savages could not have held their ground against the Roman legions under Caesar himself, as the records of Caesar's two failures to invade Britain bear witness. And that's quoted from Frederick Haberman, Tracing Our Ancestors. So based off what he said, that there has been really no civilization prior to, the Roman, occupation coming in and causing a lot of barbaric actions, deeds, and pretty much a lot of savagery beyond, man's mind to contemplate. And based off of that, there's no other civilization on record that can compare to what Rome has done, especially like you said, England has never done anything like that until, a lot of these places have been occupied underneath Roman occupation. And hopefully we're not peaking. All right, so next, so one of the great travesties of modern times is the indifference shown by the average Irishman to his own countryman's illustrious past. Those who come to browse the subject may be fooled into thinking that Wales and not Ireland was the original seat of Druidry. Most Welshmen will not contradict this false notion, and most Irishmen will not be inclined to refute it. Sadly, few Irishmen would be able to educate the curious investigator and remind him that the civilizations of Ireland far predates those of Wales. So, sorry, take that off. So the people, once again, who are in Ireland today, they don't really know much about the past of Ireland because they themselves aren't the true descendants. They are just now what we call the current occupiers, who have inherited because of the original people who were there are no longer there. So it's almost like they adopted the culture just to kind of keep it going in continuity. But to talk about it going to its ancient past and going back to ancient antiquity, they cannot do. So when talking about the Druids' history is now being spoken about as of they got their start in Wales, when that's not the truth. Druids' start come from Ireland. All right. So it says, it is hard upon Ireland that her Druids should have been so long neglected, and the honors of mystic wisdom become the sole possession of Wales. It is true, however, that the Irish have been less eager about their ancestral glory in that aspect, and have not put forward, as the Welsh have done, and Neo-Druidism to revive the reputation of the ancient order. But Ireland had its Druids, and traditionary lore testifies that country in acknowledgement of those magi or philosophers. The Welsh have a great advantage over the Irish in the reputed possession of a literature term Druidical. They assumed to know who the Druids were and what they taught by certain writings conveying secret information. The Irish do not even pretend to any such knowledge of their Druids. The Welsh, therefore, looked down with pity upon their insular neighbors and plumed themselves on being the sole successors of a people who were under true Druidical teaching and whose transmitted records revealed those mysteries. And that's coming from James Bonwick, Irish Druids and Old Irish Religions, 1894. So what he said to explain, which kind of technically, if we think about it, is taking place today with a lot of folks who come from these kingdoms from our historical past, since they don't actually know the history, the culture, how the people truly operated, the civilization itself, new occupiers or those who know more about you can actually take over your birthright and actually claim it, and in this case use it however they feel fit, because you don't claim it, you don't own up to it, you don't live it. And in this case, they're right. You know, those who are truly the descendants of the Druidical people, you know, they don't claim it, they don't talk about it, they don't know anything. Only information in regards of the Druids that anyone pretty much know is what is coming from secondhand Roman accounts. So, you know, this is just what happens when, you know, civilizations, new occupiers or conquerors start rewriting history. But that does not mean they didn't keep the truth still there intact. You just have to utilize discernment when trying to figure it out in regards to what is truth and what is falsehood. Historians and investigators who foam at the mouth to discover a pharaoh's humble grave in Ireland, or a mummified ape in Northern Ireland, or an Egyptian string of beads in a pit need to begin getting their minds around the Irish origins of civilization. Such a notion will not only put to shame their relatively paltry discoveries, but will compel them to realize the magnitude of the deception that exists, as well as the utter insidiousness of those purveyors of the lies that have laid siege to the truth. Man traveled from east to west, such as the accepted endlessly repeated dogma first disseminated by the Caesar and Roman historians. Culture spread westward from the Levant, so have most people been conditioned to believe. And yet it still comes as a shock to most people when the headlines report that Egyptian artifacts have been found at the remote regions of the Emerald Island. Pause. So because of, you know, the rewriting and the rescripting of history, people have been indoctrinated to accept falsehood as the truth. But when they are being presented information that contradicts what they have been led astray with, it puts them in an uncomfortable position, and throws them off. So like he said, them finding Egyptian artifacts in Ireland, which is known as the Emerald Isle, it kind of confuses people because they're like, hold on, this is not what I was, you know, we were taught in school. We were taught that Egypt was in so-called Africa, and how would they have Egyptian artifacts in Ireland if these cultures were completely separate for thousands of years, however we want to describe it? Would have come to find out that the Egyptian culture actually, or what you call Egyptian culture, is actually the offshoot of what actually was started in ancient Erie or ancient Hibernia, aka Ireland. Investigators throw up their hands and papers go flying. How could Easterners have traveled across the sea in boats they were not meant to have had? How and why did they navigate the seas and oceans and go to such places, live and die there, and leave their remains behind? Such questions concerning the East to West movement apparently still puzzle those who have a limited understanding of the past and of the relationships between ancient nations. The fact that Egyptian relics have been found in Ireland, that Nordic ruins exist in Bosnia, that Irish structures such as the Ohio Serpent Mound and the Round Towers are found in the Americas, or that the Japanese Anu and the American Algonquin languages are obviously derived from Irish, does not spur the average academic or individual to question what he has been told and the way he has learned. No, the textbooks don't mention any of it, and the professors and experts on TV ridicule such ideas. Ergo, they must not be true. Exactly. So I was born in the territory of Ohio, where, Ohio has a lot of ancient history that goes pretty much unspoken or untalked about. Like, for instance, the ancient giants of Ohio or the mounds of Ohio, the territory that I lived at or come from, Toledo. It's a lot of ancient history about Toledo. Eventually, I'm going to do a video about, which is pretty much is going to, hopefully for those who live there, is going to be open up their eyes and awareness. But Toledo has mounds. There also has some of the oldest, which we can say, ancient churches or cathedrals, which can be traced back to those who were saying are the creators of these monoliths. And what we're going to also see, especially like for those who don't know about Ohio, that the Erie, or those who are known as the Erie Indians, they also come from the territory that I come from. Now, Erie, we know, is the term, or it's the name that we call Ireland, or the ancient name of Ireland, and they were known as the Cat Nation, or Erie Ducats, which was known as the nation of the cat, or the nation of the Aryans, or the nation of the Erie Indians. But we understand that the term Indian is actually a misnomer for who these people truly were. So it's all coming together, and it's beautiful for it to be able to be revealed, and to see that others were already talking about what we're feeling deep down, especially when it comes down to our illustrious past, that now it's going to be start receiving the respect and the dues as we continue to keep moving forward in this age, as we continue to keep wrapping up this age of Pisces and transition into this age of Aquarius, or the Aquarian age, which is the age of knowledge. So the age of truth. All right. And it's going to come in the way of the air, from the heirs to the heirs. All right. So the same person constantly analyzes the world of reality and then changes what's inside his or her head to fit the facts. That's an awful lot of trouble for most people. Besides, how many people want to constantly change their opinions to fit the facts? It's a whole lot easier to change the facts to fit your opinions. Unsane people make up their minds, and they find the facts to verify their opinions. Or even more commonly, they accept the opinion of nearest expert, and then they don't have to bother about the facts at all. Jack Trout, positioning the battle for your mind. So, like I was speaking before, a lot of people who have been succumbed to falsehood don't want to accept the facts of the truth once it's actually been presented to them, especially when it comes down to the truth about our past. Give me 1 second. All right, greetings, brother Miguel from the house of Miguel. It's always an honor to be able to see you, Noble. I'm glad you could make it this morning. All right, so I gotta also talk. I gotta remind myself not to lose my train of thought. So um, I wanted also too, before I go to the next part, Let me go back to the sun cross. All right, so as it shows on to the right, the Irish sun cross clearly based on the zodiac and the four cardinal points. The cross and the concept of the solar Christ long prelate Christianity. So, like they say, Christ or the, ooh, excuse me, sorry about that. All right, so Christ, before I get back to my page, oops, sorry, got me going way too far. So the concept of what we know as Christ or Christianity, existed way before so-called Rome. Oh, so it was going the right way. Way before Rome came into existence. All right, sorry. Now I'm back where I was at. I ain't expected it to just fly all the way up there. All right, so yeah, so back to the sun cross. So the sun cross, as we can see, it has the four cardinal points. The four cardinal points representing north, south, east, west. Also to represent the four equinoxes, winter, spring, summer, fall, and then also too for to represent the zodiacal wheel in regard to the 12 signs, which is actually 13, but starting with Aries and ending with Pisces. And the ages or the procession of the ages that we go through, they go backwards from, from as we say, we're in the age of Pisces, we're going to the age of Aquarius, so it'll become almost like from the 12th house to the 11th house. And we'll talk more about astrology, like I said, because we supposed to know that it's like all of the ancient people from the ancient past understood the heavens. As you pay attention, just like we read earlier or from the last video, that that all of the ancient monuments or megaliths of the ancient past were all built according to astronomical, or excuse me, yeah, astronomical order according to the heavens, to the stars. Like a lot of the star forts that we have, a lot of the churches that you see out here, a lot of them are built according to, you know, the constellations above as well. So the saying or motto, as above, so below, is because the heavens above has a play or effect on our nature here. So we're connected. All right, so it says next, it is our belief that we are not meant to look back to prehistoric times because of what will be discovered. We are we are not to look to prehistory, to Atlantis, Lemuria, and the antediluvian epochs. We are certainly not supposed to look to the Northwest for the origins of culture and civilization. So when we say the Northwest, we also are not only talking about what he's going to say mostly like England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, but the Northwest also encompassed North America. So America also was part of this when regarding the uh, Western civilization, or the moving from west to east migration understanding that we're going to be talking about. They say, so we are certainly not supposed to look to the Northwest for the origins of culture and civilization. We're only supposed to look eastward, even though the hard evidence for the eastern origins of civilization is pitifully scarce, to say the least. Yes, great structures such as the Giza pyramids stand upon Egyptian soil, but the structures bear no hieroglyphs and has no dead Egyptian inside. Moreover, the vast majority of the tombs of Egypt were plundered not by poor scoundrels, as we are told, but by very rich and powerful ones from Rome. hoping to occlude the facts concerning the origins of their architects, the demigods of religion, this Roman Antinous priestarchy own and control Ireland, the land they have long raped and humbled. Let there be no doubt about it. There they sit controlling the schools, universities, media networks, and minds of their flock, hiding behind their various churches, seminaries, and charities, making sure that no evidence or teaching comes to light that exposes them for the villains they are. No, we are not to look to the West. We are told to look only to the East for our answers. Any other kind of study or research is considered meaningless, useless, and even taboo. The vast majority of scholars, including most of the world's well-meaning revisionists, habitually look to the Middle East and to officially accept dates when composing their various intriguing theories. But what if culture and civilization did not originate in the Middle East? What happens if the origins of all we know, see, and read about when it comes to religion, technology, culture, and symbolism, etc., began in Ireland by way of the lost continents of old? What if the high civilization of Egypt did not originate in Egypt, but further west, from the place known to the Egyptians as the sacred land of the setting sun? Well, this was the theory expounded by the maverick scholars and alternative historians Anna Wilkes, Connor McDarry, and Comas Beaumont. All right, so let's read the caption above. It says, Elizabeth Tudor. Now, we all know who Queen Elizabeth is from the House of Tudors. It says, the Queen of England, who suppressed Irish culture by expressly forbidding Irish traditional modes, such as poetry, music, and the Gaelic language. This suppression was age-old. After the initial conquest of Ireland, the bards were methodically tracked down and murdered. The bards preserved the knowledge of the lineage of all Irish kings and nobles. Their annihilation assured that the Irish nobility were gradually divorced from their ancient traditions. This deliberate campaign of suppression was well documented. Additionally, the Vatican forbade travel to the West in order to ensure that the existence of Ireland and the presence and teachings of the Druids remained unknown. All right, so we know that right after Elizabeth, so we can say, pause, so I don't want to go too far into the video, but we can say off of the fact that Francis Drake did receive a charter from Queen Elizabeth to voyage the so-called, search for new lands, or I think a voyage to go to so-called Asia as well. But anywho, he ended up taking a voyage to come to circumvent America, and on the West Coast, he landed in the territory that ultimately been called Albion. And he was received with a ceremony and all these different things in regards to them thinking that he was, their kin who had came back, either from the dead or from, just returning in general, letting you know that there was a connection from the West as well as from coming from that territory that we call, Great Britain, Ireland. But from what he's saying, that because of the Vatican trying to remove, which the Vatican is wrong, them trying to remove any connection to the Druids, they pretty much annihilated those who had the history and the lineage information regarding who were their kings, as well as their culture and where they come from, where they went. And we can just keep an open mind to say that maybe them coming to America and going throughout those lands are still trying to find all of the territories that still had the ancient Druid, technology, culture, whatever, because remember, the Druids existed during, Roman so-called occupation. The Druids existed during the time of who? Of he who was known as Jesus Christ. And we know that Christianity got to start from what? Druidism. So a lot is coming to the forefront to corroborate with, you know, what he's saying, because it makes sense. Especially my research, it makes sense. And I'm starting to see a pattern. And even me reading this again, because I read it before, it's kind of opening up new, information for me to kind of expound on. So hopefully for those of you who are following along, hopefully you're getting new insight, because these campaigns that were taking place, it wasn't because of the so-called kingdom itself. It was because of who was the hand that was running the kingdom, who was the ones that truly ultimately have their hands behind the, we're going to call them what's the word I'm thinking of, figurehead, the figurehead of the kingdom, the figurehead of the nation, who's actually behind them to have them campaign to go and do what they were doing in regards to hunting down all of the ancient people or the ancient civilizations, those who knew what they knew about the ancient past, and, to get rid of them. Why was that done? And once again, hopefully we're going to get a little bit more information as we read this whole book, because I think, we're going to go ahead and read the whole book instead of just jumping and shooting. We're going to go through the whole thing. So please continue to stand by. Don't forget, like I said, like, share, subscribe to the channel. That way others who are interested in this information, especially trying to understand our human origins, we have to understand or kind of get an idea from the civilizations that's already have been here based off of what they have said, instead of trying to find it in a whole nother way. So let's go ahead and continue and see what else we can go ahead and find, and let's continue to read this book. All right, so it says, but we again, what would happen to our conception of history if we understood these aforementioned eastward migrations to be a second and later wave coming after previous migrations into, to later wave coming from previous migrations into southern and eastern lands from the northwest? Does this idea not turn history as we know it upside down? It does. And such a theory will upset most readers and researchers brought up on the fallacies concocted for them by the world's perfidious academic authorities. Moreover, the same theories that unsettle the conformist mind inspires and liberates those who have always distrusted the official staples. Extremist revisionists such as this writer are more than suspicious of any theory disseminated by official sources. We distrust such theories on the site. The very fact that they are official, widely disseminated, and accepted is, in our estimation, proof of their invalidity. As we approach the end of the Piscean age, or the Piscean age of deception, we know that such fallacies and lies will be exposed in favor of the truth. Pause. So like I was just explaining to you that earlier, that we are coming out of the age of Pisces. We are ready to step into a dawn of a new age called the age of Aquarius. The age of Pisces, because of Pisces is the archetype of, let's just say, the imagination. And just because things come out of your imagination don't mean that it's real, So let's say, for instance, a lot of people's belief systems is something that comes from out of their imagination. And it can, give you comfort, it can give you joy, but also it can cause harm, it can cause pain, it can cause separation, isolation, and whatever. And in this case, like you said, deception. So the belief systems of the world has caused a lot of separation via the deception based off of those who are operating behind what's known as the hand-to-hand behind them. In the age of Aquarius, it's about truth, because it's the age or the archetype that deals with knowledge. Like you say, he's the water bearer. So that means that all the truth, all is going to start being revealed. It's going to be spoken about, and more the airways, like on social media, to the point that it's going to just start being like natural or second nature. People are just going to know. So that's what it is all going to boil down to, is like, get yourself prepared to, had to accept what's about to be revealed, because the truth, it cannot stay hidden and shrouded in secrecy or being veiled no longer when it's time for us to move forward in our evolution of humanity. It's time for us to grow up, and we have been stunted for a very long time. So with that being said, it is now time for us to become mature and step into the position of the elders, the wise ones, once again. So therefore we can be the guardians and be able to see this planet flourish the way that it was actually truly meant to before this evil found its way into our habitat. All right, let's continue. I'm sorry, I keep licking my lips. I just want to make sure they're not dry. All right, so extremist revisionists such as this writer are more than suspicious of any theory disseminated by the official sources. So I already read this again. I read that, so I don't want to read it again. My bad. One of the first revisionist historians to offer forth theories on the Western origins of civilization was Connor McDarry, in books published during the early part of the 20th century. Give me 1 second. One of the first revisionists to offer the theories of the 20th century, he wrote, "To mar the sublime pillar, this grand masterpiece of the Irish, was a part of a plot as selfish as any ever conceived. It was conceived and put into effect by the ruling spirits at the head of the Roman Catholic Church and state of their day, who cherished the ambitious and far-reaching idea of nothing less than universal rule for their Catholic Church." And that's coming from Connor McDarry. The story of the Roman Church is quite different and not a pleasant one to dwell upon. She made her advance through the medium of intrigue, war, fire, and sword, persecution, torture, confiscations, and death, the exemplification of force and intolerance. By such means, she gained control and increase in power, and the Irish church missionaries were gradually forced to withdraw from the continent. It was only by such forcible means that she could make gains against the Irish church, whose representatives surpassed hers in every field of peaceful endeavor, in learning, the sciences, philosophy, and spiritual culture. Connor McDarry, The Bible, an Irish Book. So, which once again, as we're going to see and understand, that the Bible itself is an Irish book, especially the way how Christ is spoken and how Christ come and his message, how it was preached. When you start putting the pieces together, that comes from not from a Roman way of doing things, but that comes from how those poetic bards and creators of Druidry, who were the ones who created these stories, or who the ones these stories were manufactured based off of. We're going to see that it came from Ireland. All right. Expert on Vatican intrigue, the great Alvaro Manhattan detailed in his fine works how the Roman Church had obscured the legacy of the ancient Irish. Through their agents, such as Oliver Cromwell, they commissioned the burning, looting, and wholesale destruction of the evidence that revealed what had been. There was to be no threat or hindrance to their advance toward world domination, that the Christian Church had been born in Ireland, and that its devious hierarchs had appropriated their canon from the Irish Druids, were facts to be buried and hidden forever. On the subject of Ireland's desecration, Baron Manhattan wrote. All right, so before we go to that next part, so he's saying, which technically it just kind of spoke about, is Christianity got its roots or its start, or the Christian Church got its start from Ireland, from the Irish Church. Now, we already know through history that Ireland never have been conquered or invaded by Rome, which gave them more of a pure position when it came down to their creation of the church compared to the Roman Church. And we know that the Irish monks went to northern England to convert the people in England. So the northern, or the church in England, or North England, technically got to start from the Celtic church from Ireland. But the Southern Church, or the Southern or South of England, they got their start going back to the Augustus, or the, hold on, because I got a lot of stuff in my information in my mind. The Augustinian mission. There you go. From the Augustinian, from 597. So they got their start from the Augustinian missionaries from Rome. But the Celtic ones, or the Northern English Church, got their start from those who came from Ireland. That's the reason why you notice the I ain't gonna talk about it. Let's get into the book, okay? I'm going too far off. All right, so he said pagan temples were either closed, transformed into Christian shrines, or demolished. Their properties were summarily added to the church's patrimony. The wealth of sundry religions were mercilessly expropriated, their clergy dismissed or persecuted, when not civilly or even physically obliterated. It's coming from the Vatican Billions. So the Irish, or the original shrines and temples of those who are called the Irish, or the ancient Irish, because of the conquering or the conquest that was taking place, or the quest, I can't even say conquest. Yeah, we call it conquest. So the conquest that was taking place, they were looting, pillaging, and destroying and desecrating all of the original temples and shrines that were there from the predecessors who created them for us, for for us to utilize in the way that it was meant to be used. And unfortunately, as we see, that is not what's taking place right now today. They aren't being used the way that they were meant to be used at all. Once their scorched earth policy proved successful, their hierarchs of Rome could sit back and breathe easily. Their loyal lieutenants, the Jesuits, will rule Ireland in their name, and the last remnants of the ancient stellar church would fade from the minds of men. After Christians have spent years destroying books and libraries, St. John Chrysostom, I think that is how you pronounce that, the preeminent Greek father of the church, proudly declared, "Every trace of the old philosophy and literature of the ancient world has vanished from the face of the earth." Written by, or quoted by, Helen Ellerby, The Dark Side of Christian History. So once again, because in the name of Christianity, they were removing, destroying all of what was there from the ancient past. They were destroying what our predecessors had created. Give me a second. There we go. I gotta turn that ISO down some. All right, apologize about that. My ISO was up way too high. I was barely able to see. All right, so like I said, they went on a tirade, just destroying and desecrating and removing all traces of the ancient past and anyone who had knowledge of it. And as we can see, that is a crime all in itself, because we cannot move forward without knowing our origins. We don't know who we are and what we were meant to do if we're removing what is required for us to be able to have a foundation to grow from. So as you can see today, especially here in the West, the people are lost. They're wandering around just trying to find what we can call some sense of belonging. And the fact that we aren't putting the emphasis on trying to figure out who we are by going back to our ancient past, by going through those corridors, investigating without requiring the modern media or the modern controllers of academia and religion. We cannot allow them to be the main forebears of what we all should pretty much be able to have at our fingertips, at our disposal. So it's time now we have to start making choices in regards of our intelligence. All right, 1 second. Looks like video is down. Hold on 1 second. Okay, so we're gonna still continue. Battery must have died, so but don't forget, leave comments down below. Let me know what you think so far from what we're reading. It's not definitely not every day you hear this information, which is another reason why it's important for us to kind of start, you know, linking up with like-minded individuals on this pursuit of the truth, because it's not something that one individual can do on their own. All right, so it says next, from the 6th century AD onward, the Christian monks of Ireland had set about obscuring the truth concerning the civilizations of the West. If we are in ignorance about the true history of the world, and particularly about the role of Britain and Ireland in world affairs, it is due entirely to the devices and designs of the Roman Church and the more secretive ancient organization that has used Judeo-Christianity as its front from the beginning. So that is something that we can agree that yes, they have been utilizing Christianity in a way that's not beneficial for the people. You know, it's too many questions that they can't answer, they won't answer, and in the narrative that just doesn't make sense. And so now if the people are asking, you know, have we pretty much been lied our whole life? And the fact that, you know, they have, and don't realize not everything in the book is bad. It's just whose it is. They never been taught that. Which will breed, you know, and a lot of animosity, will cause you to just forget everything that you read or heard in the book, just because of, you know, the lies that you have uncovered from those who you were supposed to trust to teach you the truth about this. And instead of them teaching the truth, you know, they just hid the facts with opinions and fallacies that they themselves, unfortunately, cannot explain. Well said, Brother McGarrett. Yes. And we're going to talk about, give me 1 second, we're going to talk about that, how all of this is connected, how ancient Ireland is connected to England via the original Berbers. Yes, we're going to talk all about that, and how and we may not do it this build, but we're going to talk a little bit about Libya and where the true Libya is, or ancient Libya is, or was, and then that'll just help put the other pieces together, that many people didn't know. All right, so let's go ahead and continue. Actually, let me pull this. Sorry about that. And also too, like, this information is, because it's new to many people. It's not even really new. It's all old. We are just reading and talking about it and bringing it back up to, to see the light of day again. So with that being said, brothers and sisters, don't take my word for it. Keep your mind open. You do the investigation yourself. Told you where you can get the book from, and just read yourself when you get that free time. But I've read this book. I've read multiple other books in regards to being able to put these pieces together, and I'm already set and solidified in, my confirmation and my belief with it. All right, so it says, so if the Christians hear of a place with something worth raping away, they immediately claim that someone is making sacrifices there and committing abominations, and pay the place a visit. You can see them scurrying there, these guardians of good order, for that is what they call themselves, these brigands. If brigands is not too mild a word for brigands, at least they try to conceal what they have done. If you call them brigands, they are outraged, but these people, on the contrary, show pride in their exploits. They believe they deserve reward. And that's Protest to Rome, written in AD 386 from the book The Death of Classical Paganism. All right, Paul. So they were already saying this stuff back then in, like I said, the 4th century, talking about how, Rome, them, or they were on this in the name of so-called Christianity, how any civilization that they didn't feel were doing what they felt was best or needed to keep their domination, that they hurried up and claimed that they were practicing sacrifice and sacrificing, or other forms of abominations, and they come in as the so-called saviors and save the day. All right, now chapter 3, Atlantis and Ireland. All right, so we already are heard in regards to the West being the old world, and not only the West technically being the ancient old world, but a form of a cataclysm took place, which required migration to happen, and migration required us to go from, which they call the ancient West, to start heading towards the East. So if that's how we see the migration pattern, then we can accept that Atlantis itself may have truly been the ancient West. But don't take my word for it. Let's see what the book says. So it says, the generally accepted history of ancient times, such as found on the shelves of our libraries and taught in our schools, is mostly fiction, made up of fables and myths, cleverly composed into a history so nicely as to lull all suspicion in the mind of the reader or student as to the fraudulent character of it. Some wonderfully clever writers have been led astray by these deceptions of history. Connor McDarry. All right, so like we said, a lot of these fraudulent, historians or writers of history are deceiving the people, and they, even within their deception, are believing in their deception. All right, the official consensus is that approximately 7,000 years ago, the ancestors of the Irish Celts broke off from dispersing and migrating Indo-European tribes that originated in the Ukrainian steppes of Russia and that may have been descendants of the Kurgans of that region. Although they were racially kindred with the early Romans, Greeks, and Germans, the various Celtic groups gradually formed their own separate identities and traditions. So, which we were explaining, or as we can already see today, that a lot of the main stock, which we can say the root, had offshoots, sub-tribes from the original stock. And that's because they start picking up their own identity, way of thinking, and then start creating their own traditions, but still tied to the root. No matter what, that's the reason why we're going to see in a lot of the languages of the various European, Indo-European cultures, how they sound the same, but you will start seeing they sound the same because these people are technically stem from the same stock. They all come from the same people, the same ancestral origins. They're not different. We just perceive them as different because of the way how, we see cultures and nations and things of that nature. All right. So it says this theory was apparently strengthened at the discovery of stunningly sophisticated burial sites at Hallstatt in Austria and Latin in Switzerland. Constructed approximately 3,500 years ago, old as they are, the civilizations revealed at Hallstatt and in Latin were related to Brythonic Celtic groups. All right. So they're telling us like a lot of these groups were related. Once again, in different parts of the world, and we don't realize that until we start looking at the monuments that were left there and how they are strikingly similar to each other, even though they're on different parts of the world. Old as they are, the civilizations revealed at Hallstatt and Latin were revealed to be Brythonic Celtic groups only, and not, as was falsely implied, with those that frequented Ireland. Clearly, an earlier and more illustrious race or tribe was responsible for the prehistoric sites found throughout Ireland. With regard to the Latin civilizations, certain archaeologists and historians have made a mistake which must be corrected. The Celts have been the subject of a false argument in archaeology, similar to those committed with regard to them in anthropology. Such indications as we possess have been given a too general significance, and they have been taken to mean that the Latin civilization and the Celts were one and the same thing. One school has in this way abbreviated the history of the Celts in Ireland in the most misleading way, making it begin with the earliest Latin objects found in the island. It is necessary here at the outset to state that the civilization of Latine really corresponds to only one of the groups of the Celts, who had split up long before the 5th century before Christ. It is the culture of the continental Brythons, who afterwards became leaders of the other groups. It is not that of the Goidels of Ireland. And that's by Mr. M.R. Dobie, The Rise of the Celts. The Celts enter history from around 600 BC. They are already split into several language groups and spread over much of Central Europe, the Iberian Peninsula, Ireland, and Britain. And studies now suggest that some of the Celtic peoples, including the ancestors of all the modern Celtic nations, had a largely pre-Celtic genetic ancestry shared with the Basque people and possibly going back to the Paleolithic. The orthodox view of the origins of the Celts turns out to be an archaeological myth left over from the 9th century. Over the past 200 years, a myth has grown up of the Celts as a vast, culturally sophisticated but warlike people from Central Europe, north of the Alps and the Danube. who invaded most of Europe, including the British Isles, during the Iron Age around 300 BC. Many archaeologists still hold this view of a grand Iron Age Celtic culture in the center of the continent, which shrank to the western rump after Roman times. It is also the basis of a strong sense of ethnic identity that millions of members of the so-called Celtic diaspora hold. But there is absolutely no evidence, linguistic, archaeological, or genetic, that identifies the Hallstatt or the Latin regions or cultures as Celtic homelands. The notion derives from a mistake made by the historian Herodotus 2,500 years ago, when, in a passing remark about the Keltoi, he placed them at the source of the Danube, which he thought was near the Pyrenees. Everything else about his description allocated the Keltoi in the region of Iberia. Stephen Oppenheimer, The Origins of the British, a Genetic Detective Story. So, like they said, the crest are been able to trace the origins of the Keltoi was back in the territory that they call Iberia. Iberia, we can also call Spain. Historically, Spain was known as Iberia, which we call the Iberian Peninsula today. So Spain and Portugal, which we all know were known kingdom-wise, was Leon and Castile. All right. But the continent or the territory, Iberian Peninsula, was also known as Iberia. And not just the so-called Iberia that we were taught about over there in the Middle East, with the territory they say where the Caucasus Mountains are. All right. So despite the consensus of Orthodox anthropologists, the fact is that neither the Irish nor their Druidic elders descended from the Kurgans or early Ukrainian hunter-gatherers. They did not, as most stubborn historians and commentators believe, hail from the steppes of Russia, Harz Mountains, Balkans, or Danube Valley. Their origins are to be found exactly where their own legends state, in the ancient civilizations that existed and thrived before recorded history. The vast majority of intellectuals and academics pay little mind to such times and places, and despite the plethora of archaeological evidence clearly proving the existence of pre-Diluvian civilizations, they continue like amnesiacs to seek for answers where they are never to be found. So, pause. So, like he said, that the Druids are from what they say they come from that their territory, from the West, or from the old ancient civilization, and they came from the West. They didn't come from so-called Europe or Northern Europe or Northern Asia or whatever. That's not their home. They didn't come from there. So as we can see once again that the hidden hand have done a job on us in regards to how they switched history around and placing a lot of different cultures and civilizations in foreign parts of the world that they know nothing about. It appears that the population of Ireland came from the West and not from Asia, that it was one of the many ways of population flowing out from the island of Atlantis. And herein we find the explanation of that problem which has puzzled the Aryan scholars. As Ireland is farther from the Punjab than Persia, Greece, Rome, or Scandinavia, it would follow that the Celtic wave of migration must have been the earliest sent out from the Sanskrit center. But it is now asserted by Professor Skylaker and others that the Celtic tongue shows that it's separated from the Sanskrit original tongue. Later others, and is more closely allied to the Latin than any other Aryan tongue. This is entirely inexplicable upon any theory of an Eastern origin of the Indo-European races, but very easily understood if we recognize the Aryan and Celtic migrations as going out about the same time from the Atlantean fountainhead. There are many points confirmatory of this belief. In the first place, the civilization of the Irish dates back to a vast antiquity. That's quoted from Ignatius Donnelly, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, 1882. So he's saying that the Aryan and the Celtic civilization or migration pretty much started at the same time, which seems that they were one and the same people. And from which we already have read that Aryan had nothing to do with your race. It was about like a pious status. It's a pious spiritual status for those who are highly spiritual and high morals, like good people. Like we keep saying, we need these type of folks to return to the world who are just highly moralistic, spiritual. They know, the truth in regards to, like I said, the ancient wisdoms, and they're doing good. They were known as the wise ones, the bright ones, the enlightened ones, And in this case, anciently, they were known as the ancient Aryans, or which we could also say the predecessors of the Druids. There is no evidence in the British Isles to suggest that a population group of any size migrated from the continent in the first millennium BC. Sir Barrington Windsor Cunliffe, Iron Age Britain. The myths and legends of our ancestors were composed by people whose world was anything but stable and unchanging. The world they knew had been visited by disasters of inconceivable proportions. Even in relatively recent times, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, earthquakes, tornadoes, and similar natural occurrences have devastated land masses and annihilated countless thousands of lives. Pause. And the same thing happened ancient or historically, brothers and sisters, which requires migrations to happen all the time. If the land becomes unstable because of whatever weather anomalies is taking place, you have to leave. You have to go and seek shelter somewhere else. And we know a lot of lands were inundated underwater, and then a time will come when those lands will no longer be under the water and they would be above. And people who were no longer there for thousands of years, their future posterity may traverse back to those lands, once they hear about them from the mythos. Someone eventually is going to embark back onto those lands, who's going to just be on the quest to see about their origins. And that's what's going on now. We are rising in our from our slumber. We were in a deep sleep, comatose, dealing with amnesia and aphasia. And now that we're able to put things together and able to articulate what it is that we have come to know is the facts of who we are, then we are able to now to be able to pick up where our predecessors left off at and correct the record. And part of that is going back in time and remembering. And when I say remembering means regrouping, coming back together as one through shared understanding, knowledge, wisdom of our predecessors, going back to ancient antiquity, which brings us technically into a body politic. We have seen worlds in flames and have felt the comet strike the earth. We have seen the whole coast of South America lifted up bodily 10 or 15 feet and let down again in an hour. We have seen the Andes sink 220 feet in 70 years. Vast transpositions have taken place in the coastline of China. The ancient capital, located in all probability in an accessible position near the center of the empire, has now become nearly surrounded by water, and its site is on the peninsula of Corea. There was a time when the rocky barriers of the Thracian Bosphorus gave way, and the Black Sea subsided. It had covered a vast area in the north and east. Now this area became drained and was known as the ancient Lectonia. It is now the prairie region of Russia and the granary of Europe. Professor Winchell, the Pre-Adamites. There is ample geological evidence that at one time, the entire area of Great Britain was submerged to the depth of at least 1,700 feet. Over the face of the submerged land was strewn thick beds of sand, gravel, and clay, termed by geologists the Northern Drift. The British islands rose again from the sea, bringing those water deposits on their bosom. What is now Sicily once lay deep beneath the sea, subsequently rose 300 feet above the sea level. The desert of the Sahara was once underwater and is now burning sands, are a deposit of the sea. Ignatius Donnelly, Atlantis, the antediluvian world. Exactly. So even pause. So even the territory down in, Arizona, um, it was at a time that this place was underwater, and I know that is because they have found seashells in the middle of the desert, and you're only going to get seashells if it was covered by water, if there was water there. All right, so we have to accept that it was time that many of the lands that we are now occupying was underwater. All right. Research since the 1970s suggests that there were 3 global superfloods, 15,000 to 14,000 years ago, 12,000 to 11,000 years ago, and 8,000 to 7,000 years ago. The second period ties in with the date Plato ascribed in the Timaeus and the Critias to the destruction by earthquakes and flooding of Atlantis, and with the Tamil myth of the submerging of the fabled land of Kumari Kandam. There is also strong evidence that nearly half the total meltwater released at the end of the last ice age was concentrated into these 3 relatively short periods. Such events will have had a momentous impact on the human inhabitants at that time, leaving a marked impression on oral tradition, the original transmitter of all ancient myths. Aryan, bridging the myth science into the flood. Pause. So that's reason, once again, that many civilizations and cultures today, their mythos story will talk or tell you about the flood, or there was a flood. And I'm not talking about coming from the biblical aspect, but a lot of tribes and or indigenous people stories will tell you about that. Yeah, that their ancestors told about a great flood in regards to, like I said, what happened in the past. So these stories are, like you said, are remembered because they impacted the people as a whole, and something of that magnitude you will remember, and you will talk about them for centuries to come, even though some of the story may get changed, but the meat of it will still be the same. You'll still get the understanding that you need out of it. So this is good information to know, once again, brothers and sisters. Even though the devastating cataclysms that obliterated the antique civilizations left survivors in a desperate physical state, it did not leave them in as primitive a condition as we are compelled to believe from the writings of historians of later ages. Erroneously convinced their Neolithic cave dwellers were the first civilized specimens on Earth. Exactly. So when these cataclysms took place, it didn't have or resets, that's probably another way to say it, it didn't have the people going all the way back to, day one again of how to do things with the so-called caveman theory. Like, nah, that didn't happen. That's far from the truth. In my opinion, we were already perfect. I just say that we were already perfect. Civilizations were already thriving for a very, very long time. Like I said, longer than modern records can remember. And when these resets happen, especially from antediluvian time, we didn't lose all of the knowledge of that past. It just, unfortunately, it was only a small amount of folks will remember, depending on how many stayed alive and what happened during that time to the point that we're at now. Which, based off of what we're reading, that evil that came or survived with the cataclysm is on a campaign to remove and destroy any of those people and civilizations who still had remnants and knowledge of the past, so therefore they can keep their dominion and rule. All right, so it says a study where I left off at. So a study of the myriad Mesolithic and megalithic ruins of Britain and Europe, created as raquims in stone to vanish technology of lost ages, of the various cyclopean remains of sunken cities and earth zodiacs, and if the worldwide petroglyphic record convinces us that the official dates given for human technological development are inaccurate and unstable, or unsustainable. In short, there is a big difference between the sorry prehistoric creatures conjured before us by myopic historians and those who, having been robbed of their advanced cultural trappings and displaced from ancestral habitats, were subsequently compelled to rebuild empires after the originals had been obliterated by ferocious forces believed to have been unleashed by angry and vengeful gods. The situation is perfectly explained by Beaumont, one of the very few men to refute the welter of historical fallacies concerning primordial humanity. Pause. And I always talk about Beaumont, especially in his book, The Great Deception. And we're going to hopefully pull up that if I have enough time, because I don't want to be too long this morning, in regards to what he found about Ireland. And it's pretty good to know, especially since we call ourselves Anglo-Saxon Berbers, to give reverence to not only our mother, but also to our father, because we are who we come from without doubt or contradiction. All right, so, and like he said too, based off what we're told and according to the Earth, to the zodiac, and how things are lined up, it doesn't make sense, So we have to study our history a little differently compared to what the modern narrative is explaining. The ancient civilization of the land we call Egypt has been pronounced by archaeologists as flawless of its type from the very first. It reveals none of the painful steps from primeval beginnings, passing through the Paleolithic, Neolithic, and Bronze Age to that of iron. It apparently burst upon the scene into the exotic radiance, its perfected civilization accordingly having been described as a miracle. Science cannot admit any such miracle, and another explanation must be forthcoming. Beaumont, The Riddle of Prehistoric Britain. So, like he said, a lot of these civilizations just popped up out of like thin air and it's already ready to go, flourishing like they've been there for freaking forever. And science or modern historians have no way to explain it. All right. One interesting indication concerns the Egyptian rock tumuli with their various compartments and dome and passage tombs, or long chambered barrows of Brittany, Scandinavia, Portugal, and southwest France. If both types were derived from one original source, as generally accepted today, it follows that those of the north and the west, more primitive constructions than the mastabas, must have preceded them. It would be manifestly absurd to argue that mastabas, perfected as they were, would be taken into the west in a far ruder and more primitive form. Thus, the inference must be that the mastabas are a development of the earlier chambered barrows from the west and north. Ebit. So, like they're saying that the work of these Egyptian mastabas had to have came or were already done in the territory that we will say Ireland, England, Great Britain, France, and not in or the West, like we also say America, and not in the territory that they say, which is Africa. After detailed studies into antiquity, Beaumont, like a few other brave alternative historians, was convinced that great civilizations of the past had been entirely decimated and some kind of universal upheaval of unimaginable proportions. It was, they conjectured, the survivors from a ruined world who transmitted the elements of civilization into the new world that arose from the ashes of the old. Since the survivors of the pre-Diluvian empires had been displaced to various parts of the globe, we find the strikingly similar cultural elements appearing in every hemisphere. Suggestively, in many cases, we also find the earliest elements to be more sophisticated than later variants. All we can see with certainty is that the earliest inventions of mankind are the most wonderful that the race has ever made. The first use of fire and the discovery of the methods by which it can be kindled, the domestication of wild animals, and above all, the processes by which the various cereals were first developed out of some wild grasses. These are all discoveries with which within ingenuity and in importance, no subsequent discoveries may compare. They are all unknown to history, all lost in the light of an effulgent dawn. Professor Max Muller. So yeah, so a lot about our ancient past, especially the sciences and the technology that we utilize to do even some of the most simple things today, has truly been lost. And as this commerce could not, as we have seen, have been carried on by the Romans, Greeks, Etruscans, or Phoenicians, because their civilizations flourished during the Iron Age, to which this age of bronze was anterior, where then we are to look for a great maritime and commercial people who carried vast quantities of copper, tin, and bronze, unalloyed by the lead or the lead of the south of Europe to Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Ireland, England, France, Spain, Switzerland, and Italy. Where can we find them, save in that people of Atlantis, whose ships, docks, canals, commerce provoked the astonishment of the ancient Egyptians, as recorded by Plato, Ignatius Donnelly, Atlantis, The Antediluvian World, 1882. So, like he says, this old ancient civilization or culture or race of people predates all the cultures we know of today, but they established or reestablished themselves after that catastrophe in the territories that we call the West. In this case, he's talking about Denmark, Norway, Ireland, England, Sweden, in East Europe, Northwest Europe, which is still part of the West, what they call the Western civilization. Along with the American investigator Ignatius Donnelly, Coleman's Beaumont found evidence to support the radical idea that situated the great pre-Diluvian civilizations in the northwestern hemisphere. Britain and Ireland were the remnants, wrote Beaumont, of the empires of Atlantis, and it's from these regions that the most civilized and sophisticated peoples originated. Exactly. There are no signs of Paleolithic man in the parts of Mesopotamia where civilization can be first detected, the region being generally young. Professor W.J. Perry, Growth of Civilization. From the intriguing accounts of Plato, we glimpse indistinct images of the havoc that reduced man to the condition of the hunter-gatherer, so beloved of the modern archaeologist and historian. This vast power, gathered into one, endeavored to subdue with a blow our country and yours and the whole of the region. Then Salome, your country, shone forth in the excellence of her virtue, strength among all mankind. She was preeminent in the military skill and was the leader of the Hellenists. She defeated and triumphed over the invaders and preserved from slavery those who were not yet subjugated, and generously liberated all the rest of us who dwelt between the pillars. But afterwards occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of the misfortune, all your warlike men and the bodies sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared in the depths of the sea. Plato's Critias. Similar accounts as those of the Athenian philosopher are to be found in the tribal myths and legends of every hemisphere. The historian of merit asks if there existed a single society that did not record the fact that the world had arisen or arisen from a pyre, or that the world's upturning had ended the epoch of ancestral god kings. Down in the bottom of the sea are the proud cities and the worldly treasures corrupted with evil. Song of the Flood, Hopi Indian saga. Earthquakes shook the world and rent it. Excuse me. Creatures turned fierce, becoming beasts of prey, wherefore others turned timid. Wretchedness and hunger abound. Black magic, war, and contention entered to the hearts of men and creatures. Zuni Indian legend. The pillars supporting the sky crumbled, and the chains from which the earth was suspended shivered to pieces. Sun, moon, and stars poured down into the northwest, where the sky became low. Rivers, seas, and oceans rushed down to the southeast, where the earth sank. Chinese legend. Source: Ti Chi, Short History of Chinese Civilization. The moon's chariot shall run amok, and the zodiac and the Pleiades will burst into tears. None of these will return to the duty expected of it. Ariadne will shut its door and will be hidden within the closing cloud banks. In the twinkling of an eye, the seas will rise up, and the arena of the winds shall be opened once again. The winds shall do battle together with a blast of ill omen, making their din reverberate from the constellation to another. That's coming from Godfrey of Monmouth, Prophecies of Merlin from History of the Kings of Britain. So they're telling you about all of the civilizations in regards to what happened based off of their origin stories. The whole continent heaved and rolled like the ocean's waves. The land trembled and shook like the leaves of a tree in a storm. Temples and palaces came crashing to the ground, and monuments and statues were overturned. The cities became heaps of ruins as the land rose and fell. Quivered and shook, the fires of the underneath burst forth, piercing the clouds in roaring flames 3 miles in diameter. There they were met by lightning shafts which filled the heavens. A thick black pall of smoke overshadowed the land. Huge cataclysmic waves rolled in over the shores and extended themselves over the plains. Cities and all things living went down to destruction before them. Agonizing cries of the multitude filled the air. The people sought refuge in their temples and citadels only to be driven out by fire and smoke. And the women and the men in their shining garments and precious stones cried, "Mu, save us." During the night the land was torn asunder and rent to pieces. With thunderous roarings the doomed land sank. That's from Change Churchward, The Lost Continent of Mu. Once again, a lot of our land, a lot of people, a lot of civilizations just went under because of floods, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, things that you can't control, and we cannot control Mother Earth. Whenever she decides, or Mother Nature, whenever she decides to do what she does, your only thing you can do is get out of the way. And that's what we have to do, Remember who we are, take what we can take, remember what we can remember, in regards to the knowledges, the knowledge, the culture, some of the technology, whatever, and keep it moving. All right. So like the great astronomer Edmund Halley, Charles Darwin, author of The Origin of Species and the Descent of Man, was one of the few men of science who pondered the evidence of global upheaval that met him everywhere he turned. This explanation for the innumerable anomalies that the Earth's geologic and archaeological record presented can be found in his travel journey. What then has exterminated so many species in the whole genre? The mind is at first irresistibly hurried into the belief of some great catastrophe. But thus to destroy animals both large and small, we must shake the entire framework of the globe. No lesser physical event could have brought about this wholesale destruction, not only in the Americas, but in the entire world. Certainly no fact in long history of the world is so startling as the wide and repeated extermination of its inhabitants. From Journal of His Voyage of the HMS Beagle. Before modern anthropologists and archaeologists had begun their investigations, the only references to the early inhabitants of Europe and Britain came from the incompetent Greek historians and duplicitous imperialist Roman documenters who never inquired into the origins of those predecessors of peoples regarding as barbaric, unruly, and irrepressibly aggressive. Little has changed in 2,000 years. To borrow an admonishing line from the Egyptians, our modern historian is, like his Greek and Roman sires, patently young of mind. So, like they're saying that Rome, during their conquests or invasions, they don't care to know the origins of the people who they're taking over or who they're destroying. And even though they may write about them in their lores later, they're not telling you the truth about all who they were, and they're not giving you the full facts because they don't know. All right. That in the mind, you are all young. There's no old opinion handed down among you by ancient tradition, nor any science which is hoary with age. The Egyptian priest speaking to Salam, the father of Plato, or Salam, the father of Plato. The story of the Irish people begins about 10,000 years ago, when the first men arrived from Europe to what was then probably already an island. These wanderers from Middle Europe were nomadic hunters, using flint for their arrows and knives. In their search for food, they gradually spread to different parts of the island, living from hand to mouth along the coast by rivers and lakes, competing with animals for the food needed to sustain life. These hunters have left little trace other than the primitive flint instruments they used. James Lydon, The Making of Ireland. The university trained experts who strongly believe European Celts to have been a loose affiliation of Indo-European tribes fail to explain how those supposedly disconnected and tribally unrelated groups came to speak the same language of Gaelic. Linguists and philologists have noted that the many Indo-European languages appear to have been derived from a parent language. In 3000 BCE, the people who would later speak Hindi, Persian, and Greek could quite possibly have communicated with one another freely in languages similar enough to be understood by each, if indeed the people were related to the language they spoke. Werner Keller, The Bible's History. A few experts tacitly admit this parent language to have been Proto-Gaelic. In any case, the similarity between apparently disparate tribes and nations is striking and intriguing. For instance, the word for the king is found to be almost identical in several languages. German, regent, Konungrik, or Konark. I don't speak German, so I apologize if I butcher it. French, Roy, Latin, Rex, Sanskrit, Raj, or Raja, Celtic, Rick, Irish, Gaelic, Ri. Additionally, the word for poet, seer, or bard has been found to exist in similar form in several languages. Navajo, Hatali, Cherokee, Talanua, and Gaelic Tals, as in Talanesian or Talisin. And we have the universally similar words for serpent or snake. Mayan, Nakan, Hebrew, Nakash or Nashan, Irish, Nather or Nathrak, Nader, Nas-Ase, German, Nader, Anglo-Saxon, Adder, Cornish, Nader or Nader, Norse, Naor, Gothic, Nadir, Sanskrit, Nagas or Nadi, Latin, Natrix, Native Indian, Nakopawa, which means snake priest, and Sumerian, Nagi, or Anaga, or Anunnaki. Paul. So as we can see, once again, just how these cultures or civilizations of people are still related, and we can see how they are related based off of their native tongue they speak and how they have same origin in regards to where they come from. So like even us today who speak English, which we know it still ties to old German, Saxon, whatever, which goes back to Germanic, the other Germanic languages they speak of, which as we see are all tied together. All of the languages that we speak of here right now today all stem back to the same group of people who come from the same common stock, which can be traced back to the ancient world that they call Lemuria Atlantis. So this striking similarity is easily explained, of course, once we realize that these so-called Celtic, or more properly Indo-European tribes were originally, before their dispersal, much more homogeneous. A group then has been conjectured. It is explained once we understand that these cultures and tribes had common primordial ancestors who came from homelands not in Eastern Europe, but in Ireland, Wales, England, and Scotland, and from decimated habitats that went the way of the land bridges once connecting Ireland to England and England to Western Europe. This westward migratory movement also helps to explain why it is that no continental type customs, buildings, or burial mounds have been discovered in Ireland corresponding to the dates given for the first major Celtic migrations to Ireland from the east. It certainly explains why late invaders and settlers on Ireland, the Goidelic and the Brythonic Celts, and the Belgi, Picts, and Caledonians, etc., not only refer to in their megalithic predecessors as the gods, but why they took these predecessors for gods. Archaeologists cannot support for any evident change in lifestyle between the older period and the period in which the Celts are supposed to have arrived. Whatever the explanation of this puzzle, there remains no direct evidence for a presence of continental Celtic peoples in Ireland. That's coming from Carmel McCaffrey and Leo Eaton in Search of Ancient Ireland. So, like they said, that they can't find any evidence about their lifestyle between any older period, about when the Celts had so-called arrived to Ireland. And that's because of the origin story don't match. They didn't come from the so-called East. They came from the West. The simple fact is that the relatively late eastward migrations into Britain and Ireland of Celtic tribes are not to be considered the cause for the civilizations that arose and thrived there. And many anthropologists and historians know this. Nevertheless, due to pressure exercised from above, experts are often loath to question the origins of the sophisticated megalithic culture they know existed and thus was responsible for humankind's development, not just in Ireland and Britain, but throughout the world. The same stubborn attitudes that exist in regards to so-called mound builders of America persist as regards the megalithic Irish. In particular, the myths and legends of the races and nations that knew better are habitually dismissed or mistranslated. Berryfield was told that the fascinating petrographs of North America that he proved were Irish in origin were merely doodles made by Indians high on hallucinogenic substances. The same attitude does not prevail regarding the hieroglyphics of Egypt because Egypt is in the East. Investigators such as Fell and Velikovsky, who reverently employ data from the mythological archive to solve history's mysteries, are ridiculed and labeled unscientific. The East to West migration propaganda story is proffered forth and spluttered by experts ad infinitum. So, like he said, because of the modern narrative not want to give the credit to the West, you're going to have those so-called experts of science today in history are going to scoff at the idea that those people who created those megalith or come from the sophisticated megalithic culture could have came from the West, and yet they must have came from the East. And then if they did do this, then they had to have been so-called some modern fabricated Indian group had to been on some form of, intoxicant to create something that they would say that's, mirrors the civilization or the culture who we saying it is, and to yet to give credit to the new occupiers of that territory and say it's their work when it's not. Oh, excuse me. All right, so the simplest things are always those the scholars see least. They go searching into the beyond with infinite pains, neglecting the truth right under their noses. And it's coming from Fabrier de Eleve, la langue abreque restituti. So, like he's saying that instead of trying to go out and look far and wide for the truth and regarding what you're looking for, is right underneath your nose. Just look where you are, look around you, and you will find what you're looking for. Who shall thoroughly discern the truth from the fiction with which it is everywhere entwined, and in many places altogether overlaid? Hayes O'Grady. It was primordial Irish customs and traditions that moved eastwards to influence European Celts, and not the other way around. Quandaries concerning the origins of the Irish Celts can be explained when we take heed of what the legends say, the authentic legends that is, rather than those concocted to reinforce the lie of an Eastern origin of the Irish. It is in these legends that speak of a Western origin that we find the truth concerning the ancient history of Ireland and the world. It is from the Irish legends that we find the most intriguing references to the lost pre-Diluvian continent of Atlantis. Exactly. In 1929, the author Elena Maria Withshaw wrote in her book Atlantis in Spain that the Spanish mariners and explorers, particularly during the time of Columbus, frequently visited the shores of southern Ireland searching for evidence concerning the lost continent they refer to as Antillia. Clearly, the Spanish were in no doubt where to look for knowledge concerning the world that existed before the flood, Withshaw wrote. The presence of the Irishmen among the Palos sailors was no fortuitous circumstance. Fray Ortega tells us that every year down to 1492, these Spanish mariners had sought the island of St. Brandon, who, as the Book of Lismore tells us, was the founder of the monastery of Clonfert in the 8th century, and wandered up and down the coast of Kerry, seeking for traditions of the western continent, and praying that the hidden land might be revealed to them. We might also add that, in our opinion, the great Tartesian, Atlantean ruins, galleries, wells, and forts of Andalusia that Withshaw studied for most of her life and that inspire her book are of Irish design. These ruins date from over 10,000 years ago and are marvels of Neolithic construction. Although they were subsequently built upon by settlers from eastern lands, they are clearly of Western origins. Certain researchers and experts on British prehistory have voiced doubts as to whether any so-called Celtic tribes ever actually invaded Ireland. L.A. Waddell and Beaumont found the idea preposterous, and the new science of DNA substantially corroborates their doubts concerning the spuriousness of Celtic east-to-west migration theories. Geneticist and genealogist Professor Brian Skies confirms in his book Saxons, Vikings and Celts, The Genetic Roots of Britain and Ireland, that the Celts did not contribute to the DNA of the original inhabitants of Ireland. He shows that migrations from the east had no substantial effect on the genetic makeup of the Aboriginal Irish. Moreover, he confirms that 9,000 years ago, the ancestors of the Irish, Welsh, Scots, and English crossed land bridges connecting their lands to Europe. Moving eastwards, these tribes found Europe to be drastically underpopulated, Professor Skies writes. So he's saying that those who our predecessors are, as us being the descendants from the territory we now call Great Britain here in America, we actually did originally come from America first, which was known as the Great Appalachia, also the ancient Atlantis. We came from there first, then went east, and now from after being over east or in this territory where they say that we were sent to because of transatlantic or whatever situation or what took place, we don't know. We end up coming back over here in the West, or we end up back here in the West. But now, as we're learning who we are, we can truly understand and see that we not only were originally here, but all of the cultures that come from there in the territory going towards the east, like in the territory of Great Britain, the British Isles, Europe, originally got their start from the people who came from the West. All right. So it says, I can see no evidence at all of a large-scale immigration from Central Europe to Ireland and the west of the Isles generally, such as been used to explain the presence there of the main body of Gaels or Celts. The Celts of Ireland and the Western Isles are not, as far as I can see from the genetic evidence, related to the Celts who spread south and east to Italy, Greece and Turkey from the heartlands of Hallstatt and Latin in the shadows of the Alps during the first millennium BC. Everyone has heard of Celts, Anglo-Saxons, and Vikings, and most of us are familiar with the idea that the English are descended from Anglo-Saxons who invaded eastern England after the Romans left, while most of the people in the rest of the British Isles derive from indigenous Celtic ancestors with a sprinkling of Viking blood around their fringes. Yet there is no agreement among historians or archaeologists on the meaning of the words Celtic or Anglo-Saxon. What is more, new evidence from genetic analysis, see note below, indicates that the Anglo-Saxons and Celts, to the extent that they can be defined genetically, were both small immigrant minorities. Neither group had much more impact on the British Isles gene pool than the Vikings, the Normans, or indeed immigrants of the past 50 years. Stephen Oppenheimer, The Origins of the British, a Genetic Detective Story. So what he's saying is that the original people there still had a high amount of genetic DNA that contributed to the new identities that we are saying that stem from the Anglo-Saxons, the so-called Celts, and who are known as, the Irish or the Welsh or whatever. Any of those new foreign groups that came in only had a small amount of contribution to the genetic gene pool to the people there as a whole. All right. So it says scientific anthropologists and classical historians have proved that the Celts of history were the non-Aryan, round-headed, darkish, small-statured race of South Germany and Switzerland, and that the Celts, properly so-called, are totally lacking in the British Isles. Thus, to speak as so commonly done of Celtic ancestry, the Celtic temperament and Celtic fire amongst any section of the natives of these islands is, according to anthropologists, merely imagination. The term Celt or Celt is entirely unknown as the designation of any race or racial element of language in the British Isles until arbitrarily introduced there a few generations ago. Nor does the name even exist in the so-called Celtic languages, the Gaelic, Welsh, and Irish. It is, on the contrary, the classic Greek and Latin title of a totally different race of a totally different physical type from that of the British Isles, and that the word was only produced there by unscientific philologists and ethnologists some decades ago. And that's coming from L.A. Waddell, The Phoenician Origin of Briton Scots and Anglo-Saxons. Pause. And once again, we just read or went through some of that Phoenician origin, Briton Scots and Anglo-Saxon in one of the past previous videos we've done. And from what he's explaining here, other researchers, historians also have come to the same conclusion that what we call Celtic did not exist, and it was actually a modern creation in a way to misclassify those people who were originally there in these territories, or that territory that we at that time, to give the Celts or the Celtic identity some starting point, But for the sake of the conversation of explaining what's going on, we still use the term because of, you know, a lot of people today aren't privy to that knowledge. And we are chapter 4, and we are almost 2 hours into this. And we're not going to start chapter 4, but I just want you to see that this is going to be the next live build that we're going to do. When I get a chance to set up the next one, which hopefully should be here soon. So I'm going to try to be a lot more consistent because I don't want to keep anybody waiting to see what we're going to read next. I know it's almost like a cliffhanger, but please rest assured that we will continue with a part 3 so we can move further along in regarding the origin of the Irish, regarding the Irish Origins of Civilization, Volume 1. So for those of you who have been here this morning, thank you. I really appreciate you for your time. You know, once again, please don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel. The goal is for us to be able to, you know, see what has been hidden for a very long time and to be able to share it in the form that we all can understand the most. And that way we can be able to explain to our posterity, our heirs, as they get of age, in the same form that our predecessors were doing, which is an oral traditions. So we have to get used to teaching and speaking to the youth in regarding of who we are, where we come from, again, where they can now start being able to take that in and been able to do something with it in regards of memory. Because if you don't tell them or show them who they are and be able to explain it, then they're more likely to be led astray and forget who they are, and then start picking up habits that it's not the ways of their predecessors who they come from. So the time now is about, where I'm at, it's about 8:27 a.m., which Eastern time is about 11:27. So hopefully those of you who have been able to, you know, get yourself prepared for your day knows that knowledge is to be shared. You know, so as you go out and you learn and you experience, be willing to share what you learn with others, especially the youth, because we want to be a representation of those who come before us, and those who come before us were wise teachers and elders who were taught the ways of that we're supposed to be taught, going back to the age of going back to the age of catastrophe, which we can call the antediluvian era. And with that being said, I love you. See you on the flip side. I am out.